The station hung in the void, a lonely bastion of human ingenuity on the edge of known space. Outpost Ganymede, a sprawling construct of reinforced titanium and carbon weave plating, stood as a testament to mankind's stubborn refusal to be caged by the boundaries of the familiar. The artificial gravity hummed beneath its walkways, and neon-lit corridors pulsed with the controlled chaos of interstellar diplomacy. Here, humanity's future with the galactic concord teetered on a razor's edge. Sergeant Elias Voss moved through the corridors like a predator in his own right, his movements precise, economical, each step betraying the restless energy of a man who had seen too much war. His presence was an unspoken deterrent, a reminder that even in the shadow of diplomacy, violence had its place. He had been stationed here as security, an enforcer, a keeper of the fragile peace that threatened to fracture with every passing moment. The Vor'Kash delegation had arrived 3 days ago, their war pride banners rippling through the station's sterile air. Towering figures of corded muscle and razor-sharp claws, they bore the unmistakable poise of a species forged in the crucible of battle. Their leader, High War Pride Zarkath, had been diplomatic by Vor'Kash standards. Elias had seen the way. They watched the humans, eyes gleaming with unspoken judgments, assessing, weighing. The negotiations were precarious. Humanity was a newcomer to the galactic stage, still proving its worth among civilizations that had long deemed them an upstart species. The Vor'Kash were warriors, bound by honor and strength, and to them respect was earned through combat, not words. That was why they had brought the creature, the Warbeast, a symbol of their might, their apex predator, genetically sculpted to be the ultimate engine of destruction. It was a spectacle, a display of dominance wrapped in the guise of tradition. The Warbeast, a nightmare of fur and sinew, paced within its containment field, golden eyes burning with a primal intelligence. It was unlike anything from Earth, a hybrid of feline grace and reptilian brutality, its muscles coiled with the promise of carnage. The Vor'Kash revered it as the ultimate test of warrior mettle, and then, in an instant, control shattered, a power fluctuation, a whisper of static over the comms. The containment field flickered, stuttered, and then collapsed. A collective breath hitched in 1,000 throats as the Warbeast lunged, a living storm of talons and rage. The security detail barely had time to react before it tore through them, bodies crumpling like broken dolls. Elias was already moving. Time slowed. His body, honed through years of battle, acted before his mind could catch up, a sidestep, fluid, and practiced. The beast's claws raked empty air where his throat had been. The room was a symphony of screams and guttural roars, but Elias heard only the drumbeat of his pulse. He reached for his sidearm and knew instinctively that it wouldn't be enough. The Warbeast turned, intelligent, assessing. It recognized a predator when it saw one. The two locked eyes, an unspoken challenge crackling between them. Elias shifted his stance, no hesitation, no fear. The beast lunged. He met it head-on, a pivot, a feint. His body moved with the brutal efficiency of a man who had survived wars where the odds were never in his favor. He slipped under the swipe of its monstrous claws, driving his boot into the junction of its ribs. The impact resonated through the chamber. The creature staggered, not from pain but from surprise. No human had ever moved like this before. No human had ever been this fast, this lethal. The Vor'Kash warriors watched, their expressions unreadable. To them, this should have been an execution. Instead, it was a demonstration. Elias seized the advantage, pressing forward. A precise strike to the beast's throat, another to its knee. It faltered, snarled, eyes wide with something dangerously, close to fear. The moment stretched, an eternity wrapped in the span of a heartbeat. The Warbeast hesitated. That was its undoing. Elias didn't. With one final decisive motion he struck, a blur of human ingenuity and ruthless instinct. The Warbeast collapsed, motionless. The chamber fell into absolute silence. The Vor'Kash stared. Their war-pride leader, Jarkath, took a measured step. Forward, his golden eyes locked onto Elias. Something shifted in the air, an intangible force crackling between them. Respect, fear, recognition. The silence shattered as a Vor'Kash warrior roared, a sound that was neither anger nor sorrow but something primal and raw. Others joined in, a chorus of voices rising in the wake of an impossible feat, and then Jarkath spoke. The words echoed through the chamber, a declaration, a challenge, a prophecy. Elias Voss was no longer just a soldier, he was something else. Now, something more. The tension in the chamber was palpable, a thick, invisible force pressing against every being present. The Vor'Kash war-pride had gone deathly silent, their piercing eyes locked onto the lone human standing over the corpse of their so-called unkillable Warbeast. Elias Voss exhaled, his heartbeat steady despite the carnage before him. His hands, still clenched into practiced fists, ached from the brutal encounter. Blood, alien and human alike, spattered the floor beneath him. But the silence that followed was heavier than any battlefield he had ever known. Jarkath stepped forward, his massive form casting an imposing shadow. His golden eyes burned with something beyond fury, beyond mere respect. The Vor'Kash prided themselves on their warriors, their strength, their raw physical dominance. To them, the Warbeast was a sacred challenge, one that no human should have bested so effortlessly. But Elias had done more than best it. He had humiliated it. The gathered Vor'Kash warriors murmured in their guttural language, some in awe, others in skepticism. Their war code was clear. No weak species could defeat a Warbeast. Strength was law, and yet here stood a man who had shattered that very law. Jarkath's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the murmurs. His words held weight, a proclamation laced with warning and revelation. This human, he declared in perfect galactic common, his tone edged with something close to reverence, is more than what we believed. A warrior beside him, his armor adorned with markings of elite status, stepped forward. His eyes flickered with something darker, doubt, perhaps even challenge. "No," the warrior growled, his voice a low rumble of defiance. "This is deception, a trick. No human is capable of this." Elias tilted his head, scanning the warrior with calculated indifference. He recognized the type instantly. A soldier too proud to accept the impossible, a warrior unwilling to admit that his beliefs had been shattered before his very eyes. The warrior unsheathed a curved, obsidian-like blade from his belt, the weapon, humming with latent energy. If this human is truly strong, let him prove it. Jarkath hesitated. He understood what was happening, what had to happen. The Vor'Kash did not debate strength with words. They measured it in battle, in the heat of conflict where only the worthy survived. If Elias refused, humanity would be seen as weak, and the fragile alliance they were trying to build would crumble. But if he accepted, Elias cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the stillness. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." The warrior lunged, blade flashing in a deadly arc. Elias moved before thought, his body reacting with instinct born from countless battles. He ducked low, sidestepping with liquid precision as the blade whistled past his shoulder. Before the Vor'Kash could recover, Elias drove an open palm into his chest, using the warrior's own momentum against him. The impact sent the Vor'Kash skidding back, but he was relentless. With an inhuman snarl, he charged again. this time with more calculation, more restraint. Elias met him head-on. Their fight was brutal, a clash of technique versus sheer physical dominance. The Vor'Kash was stronger, taller, and more heavily armored, but Elias was faster, smarter, more experienced. He anticipated every move, countering each strike with the precision of a man who had fought and survived far worse. A well-placed strike to the warrior's wrist sent the blade clattering to the ground. Elias followed up with a sharp elbow to the ribcage, and the warrior collapsed to one knee, gasping for breath. Jarkath watched, his expression unreadable. The Vor'Kash warrior, panting and bruised, looked up at Elias with wide, disbelieving eyes, and then, slowly, he bowed his head. The murmur among the Vor'Kash rose into something else, something ancient, a chant, a declaration. Jarkath nodded. The human stands. And with those words, everything changed. The chamber's tension had not eased. If anything, it had grown, heavier, thicker, as though the very air carried the weight of an impending storm. The Vor'Kash warriors, once skeptical, now watched Elias Voss with a mixture of awe, fear, and something even more dangerous: curiosity. Jarkath had made the declaration, and now there was no turning back. The human stood. That simple phrase carried profound weight in Vor'Kash culture. Elias was no longer just a soldier, no longer just a participant in negotiations. He had, unwittingly, entered their world, their sacred laws of strength and dominance. And in doing so, he had become something both revered and reviled. A Vor'Kash did not simply walk away from a challenge once declared. Neither did Elias. Jarkath turned to face his warriors, his expression unreadable. His voice, when it came, was steady, authoritative. "The war pride has seen what the human is capable of," he announced, his golden eyes scanning the assembled warriors. "But one battle does not prove dominance. Strength must be tested. Honor must be earned." A ripple of agreement passed through the war pride. Elias exhaled slowly. He had seen this coming the moment he put the Warbeast down. The Vor'Kash would never accept his strength through a single victory. They needed something more, something absolute. Jarkath stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough so that only Elias could hear. "You have a choice, human. You can refuse what comes next, return to your people, and leave this as a story the Vor'Kash tell in hushed tones. Or you can embrace it, stand before the trials, face the tests of the war pride, and prove beyond doubt that your strength is not a trick of fate." Elias considered his options. He could walk away. That would be the smart move, the diplomatic move. But walking away meant nothing to the Vor'Kash. They respected only those who stood their ground. And if he left now, humanity would forever be seen as something lesser, weak. That wasn't going to happen. He met Jarkath's gaze and nodded. "I'll stand." A murmuring growl rippled through the gathered warriors, a sound of both approval and anticipation. Jarkath raised a single hand, silencing them instantly. "The human has chosen," he declared. "The trials begin at dawn." The first trial was endurance. They had taken Elias to the wastelands beyond Outpost Ganymede's perimeter, a harsh and unforgiving stretch of rocky terrain where the temperature swung from blistering heat to bone-chilling cold within hours. Here, the war pride would test his resilience. He was given no weapons, no food, no water. Just his body, his wits, and a simple command: survive. The Vor'Kash warriors watched from a distance, making no effort to assist or intervene. They expected him to fail, expected his fragile human body to succumb to exhaustion or dehydration. But Elias had survived worse. He moved with purpose, using his knowledge of terrain and survival tactics to find shelter, conserve energy, and navigate efficiently. He adapted, just as humans always had. When the sun burned hot, he moved in shadows. When the cold came, he found natural insulation. The Vor'Kash warriors observed in silence, their expressions unreadable. By the end of the trial, Elias was still standing. He had outlasted warriors twice his size, outpaced creatures built for endurance. He did not collapse. He did not falter, and so the trial was passed. The second trial was combat. This time he would not face a single opponent. He would face three. They came at him with the raw aggression of a species bred for war, their claws extended, their movements swift and lethal. But Elias had already proven he was more than a mere soldier. He moved like liquid, slipping between attacks with an unnatural precision. Every feint was met with a calculated counter. Every strike was turned into an opportunity. The Vor'Kash fought with power, brute force, and unwavering determination. Elias fought with something different, something colder. He fought with strategy, with precision. He studied his opponents, their weaknesses, their tendencies, and then he exploited them. One fell, then another. The final warrior stood, panting, watching Elias with newfound wariness. There was no rage in his eyes now, no blind aggression, only understanding. He stepped back and dropped to one knee. The war pride roared their approval. The third trial was the most dangerous of them all. It was not a test of body, but of mind. The trial of the roaring sun was an ancient rite, one that tested not just a warrior's strength, but their will, their spirit. It was a test Elias did not fully understand until he was in the center of it. They took him deep into the heart of the war pride's chambers, where a single obsidian pillar stood, radiating an eerie glow. Here, the Vor'Kash warriors gathered. In solemn silence, Jarkath stepped forward. "This is where we face our truths," he said, "where we see who we are, stripped of all pretense." Elias frowned but said nothing. He would see this through. He was instructed to place his hands upon the pillar. The moment he did, a searing energy coursed through him. His vision blurred, and then he saw memories that weren't his, echoes of a past long buried. He saw battles fought under alien skies. He saw the rise and fall of empires. He saw warriors, locked in eternal struggle, their fates intertwined with something greater. Then he saw something else, a shadow, a presence lurking just beyond his vision, watching, waiting, something ancient, something vast. The Vor'Kash had faced this presence before, and they had lost. Elias gasped as he pulled his hands away. His breath came in ragged gulps, his mind reeling. He turned to Jarkath, his voice hoarse. "What was that?" Jarkath's expression was grim. "The past," he said. "And the future." The trial was over, and Elias Voss had changed. When he emerged from the chamber, the war pride was waiting. They had expected him to fall, to break, but he was still standing. Jarkath stepped forward, his gaze unreadable. "The trials are complete," he said, "and the human stands." The Vor'Kash warriors knelt. Elias felt a weight settle on his shoulders. He had come here as a soldier, a simple security officer caught in the whirlwind of diplomacy. Now he was something else, something more, and somewhere, in the vast darkness of space, something unseen had taken notice. The war pride knelt, their massive forms bowed in a gesture that had never been offered to a human before. The weight of the moment pressed against Elias Voss, heavier than any battlefield he had ever walked. He had survived their trials, endured their tests, and now, against all odds, he stood among them, not as an outsider, not as a mere human soldier, but as something far more dangerous, a symbol. Jarkath stepped forward, his golden eyes fixed on Elias, with a gaze that no longer held doubt. There was only acceptance now. Acceptance of a truth that neither of them had been prepared for. "The human stands," Jarkath repeated, his voice reverberating through the great chamber. "And so, the human must face the final challenge." The war pride's chant ceased. The air grew thick with something Elias couldn't quite name. Expectation, fear, reverence. "The Lion of the Void," Jarkath continued, voice solemn. "The final test, the greatest of our trials." Elias narrowed his eyes. He had faced their Warbeast, fought their warriors, survived their brutal landscapes, and endured the visions of their trial of the roaring sun. Whatever they threw at him next, he would not break. Jarkath turned, gesturing toward an ancient towering gateway at the far end of the chamber. It hissed open, revealing an abyss beyond, a cavernous arena, dimly lit by bioluminescent runes carved into the walls. The gathered Vor'Kash warriors rose, their voices now silent, their movements deliberate as they made way. Elias stepped forward, every muscle in his body wound tight. Whatever awaited him inside, he would face it the same way he had faced everything else, with calculated, ruthless efficiency. As he crossed the threshold, the doors sealed behind him, locking him. In the darkness, the arena was vast, the ground beneath his boots rough and uneven. Overhead, the only light came from the pulsating glow of alien glyphs, casting long, shifting shadows that made the air feel alive with unseen movement. Then the growl came. It wasn't like the Warbeast's snarl, nor the guttural roars of the Vor'Kash. This was deeper, ancient, a sound that vibrated through the bones, predatory and patient. Elias turned slowly, his instincts screaming at him to move, to run, but he held his ground. His hands curled into fists, his breathing steady, despite the primal terror lancing through him. The shadows shifted, and then from the abyss it emerged, a titan of sinew and darkness, its form sleek and terrible. Its body was wreathed in a strange, shifting energy, its muscles moving like liquid steel, feline in shape but something far more nightmarish. It had no eyes, only an endless void where its face should have been, shifting and writhing with an unnatural hunger. The Lion of the Void. It did not charge. It did not lunge. It simply watched, even without eyes, its presence oppressive and absolute. Elias exhaled, rolling his shoulders. His mind catalogued everything in an instant. This creature wasn't just an apex predator. It was something else, entirely, something designed, something left behind. He had seen the visions. He had felt the echoes of an ancient war, of a presence that had once loomed over the Vor'Kash, the Tsari. And now, standing before this abomination, he knew the truth. This wasn't a test of strength. This was a test of control. The lion moved. It was fast, too fast. One moment it was watching. The next, it was upon him, its massive claws tearing through the space where he had been a fraction of a second before. Elias twisted, barely avoiding disembowelment, his reflexes the only thing keeping him alive. He had fought creatures before. He had fought warriors, assassins, even monsters bred for war, but this thing, it didn't fight like anything he had ever encountered. It moved like a force of nature. Elias dodged another strike, rolling to the side, calculating his options. No weapons, no armor, just his body and his mind. The beast lunged again. He countered. A feint, a pivot, a strike to where its throat should be, except his fist met nothing but the shifting void. It didn't just move fast, it adapted. Elias gritted his teeth, adjusting his stance. He had faced impossible odds before. He had survived wars that should have killed him. He would not die here. The battle raged in the darkness, a blur of movement and fury. Elias fought with every ounce of skill he possessed, pushing his body beyond its limits, striking, dodging, anticipating. But the lion was relentless. Then, in a heartbeat, the fight changed. The creature hesitated, a fraction of a second, a moment where it should have struck but didn't, and Elias saw it, a pattern, a hesitation in its movements, an imperfection in its adaptation. It was learning, and that meant it could be outmaneuvered. Elias shifted his tactics, adjusting his movements, baiting it into patterns, making it react the way he needed it to. The more it adapted, the more predictable it became. And then, with the precision of a man who had survived too many battles to count, he made his final move. A feint, a retreat, a calculated moment of vulnerability. The lion lunged, Elias pivoted, and with a brutal, calculated strike, he drove his fist into the void where its skull should have been. A shockwave rippled through the beast. It collapsed, its massive body twitching, its strange energy flickering and fading. Silence. Elias stood over it, chest heaving, muscles screaming. He did not move, did not speak. Then the doors opened. The war pride stood in stunned silence as Elias emerged, his body bloodied but unbroken. Vor'Kash met his gaze, eyes narrowed, searching. The Vor'Kash did not speak for a long moment. Then, one by one, they knelt, not in defeat, not in submission, in recognition. Vor'Kash exhaled, stepping forward, his expression unreadable. "The lion of the void has fallen," he said, "and yet the human stands." His eyes gleamed, something ancient and knowing in them. "You are more than what we thought." Elias didn't answer. He only nodded, his mind still reeling, his breath still unsteady. But deep within, he knew. The Vor'Kash had tested him. They had sought to break him. Instead, they had crowned him, and somewhere beyond the stars, something unseen had taken notice. The real war had yet to begin. Elias stood amidst the kneeling war pride, his body aching, his mind struggling to process what had just transpired. The air was thick with reverence, but beneath it lurked something else, an unspoken realization, a shift that could not be undone. He had entered the trials as an outsider, a human warrior standing before an empire that saw his species as untested, unworthy. Now he was something else, something far more dangerous. Vor'Kash rose first, towering over Elias, his golden eyes filled with something beyond respect, beyond admiration, understanding. "You have done what none before you could," he said, his voice solemn, carrying a cross. The chamber so all could hear. "The trials are over. The war pride bears witness. The human stands." The warriors echoed the phrase, their voices a chorus of finality, of acceptance. Elias exhaled, exhaustion creeping in, but he kept his posture straight. He had no intention of showing weakness now, not when the weight of an entire species' perception rested on him. Vor'Kash stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" Elias nodded. "I've changed something." "You have reshaped the path of our people," Vor'Kash admitted. "Before today, humanity was a curiosity, a minor force, a species we tolerated but did not truly consider." His gaze hardened. "That has changed." Elias said nothing. He didn't need to. He had felt it the moment the war pride knelt. Respect, acceptance, fear. Vor'Kash continued. "The Concord will hear of this. The galaxy will hear of this. And not all will welcome what you have done." Elias knew what he meant. The balance of power in the galactic Concord was delicate. Humanity had been an afterthought in the grand scheme of things, a species finding its place among civilizations that had ruled the stars for millennia. Now they would be seen as a threat. The return to Outpost Ganymede was met with silence. The Vor'Kash warriors who had accompanied Elias walked with purpose, their demeanor transformed. No longer were they the dominant force, looking down upon humanity as lesser beings. Now they carried themselves differently, as equals. The human officers stationed at the outpost sensed it immediately. Their wary glances shifted to confusion as the Vor'Kash moved through the station without their usual air of quiet contempt. Elias felt their eyes on him. His own people, trying to grasp what had happened out there, what had changed. He didn't explain. Not yet. Instead, he made his way to the command center where Admiral Lorne waited, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You're back," Lorne said simply. Elias gave a small nod. "The trials are over." Lorne studied him for a moment, then flicked a glance at the Vor'Kash following him. "I take it they went well." Elias exhaled, the weight of it all settling onto his shoulders. Better than expected. Lorne didn't press further, but Elias could see the gears turning behind his eyes. The Admiral knew something had changed. "The diplomatic summit resumes in 2 hours," Lorne said. "I assume you'll want to be there?" Elias thought for a moment, then shook his head. "I've already said everything I needed to." Lorne raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Fine. Get some rest, Voss. You look like hell." Elias smirked. "Feels about right." Hours later, standing on the observation deck, Elias watched the stars stretch endlessly before him. The void had never seemed so vast, so dangerous as it did now. The war pride had accepted him, but that was only the beginning. The Vor'Kash were a warrior race, but they were not the true power of the galaxy. There were others, the Concord, the Silent Watchers, the remnants of the Tsari. Elias had won a battle, but he had also drawn attention. Jarkath's warning echoed in his mind. "Not all will welcome what you have done." He clenched his fists, staring into the abyss of space. He knew what came next. The galaxy had seen what one human could do. Now, it would decide what to do about it. The stars stretched infinitely before him, cold and indifferent, as Elias stood on the observation deck of Outpost Ganymede. His reflection stared back at him in the reinforced glass. A man who had walked into an alien trial and emerged as something else entirely. He had faced the Vor'Kash trials, defeated their Warbeast, bested their warriors, and conquered the lion. Of the void, he had won not just their respect, but their fear, and fear had consequences. Behind him, the station bustled with renewed energy. The diplomatic summit had concluded with a shift in power, a realignment that no one could have predicted. The Vor'Kash no longer viewed humanity as an ambitious upstart species, but as something far more significant. A rising force, an unknown variable in the carefully balanced equation of galactic politics. Jarkath had left the station with a parting look that carried both admiration and caution. "The trials proved your strength. But strength is a beacon. It draws those who seek it and those who seek to extinguish it." Elias knew what he meant. The galactic Concord would not ignore this. Neither would the shadowy forces lurking beyond known space. He had drawn the gaze of something ancient. A soft chime broke the silence. A secure message flashed across the terminal beside him. The sender was unknown, the encryption layers far beyond standard military protocol. Elias frowned and accessed it. A single line of text appeared. Subject designation, humanity. Assessment, active. Awaiting next phase. A chill crept up his spine. Somewhere, out in the vast, uncharted dark, something had taken notice of him. Of humanity. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning.